On May 7th, 1990, 30 years ago today, Alexander Joseph Mady, my father, died. Now, I know that of all things for me to talk about today, I mean, there's a lot going on in this present moment, whether it's the National Day of Prayer or the pandemic, the excitement we have about loosening of restrictions or the anxiety we have about the loosening of restrictions, Mother's Day, or even the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery. And I'll be writing a blog entry about that that'll come out tomorrow. I mean, there's so many things going on right now. But I wanted to take today to talk about something very personal and hopefully something that will be meaningful even for you. And for me, this really is about the present moment. I want to talk about my dad. I wouldn't say that I had a close relationship with my father, but that's not to say that he wasn't a very powerful presence in my life. In fact, I would say that his existence remains powerful to this very day for me. My dad was the youngest of four children to a immigrant family. My grandparents immigrated from Hungary. They came through Ellis Island. And my dad's dad, also named Alexander, or Alex, he was old world, which meant that he was a little bit controlling. He was given to expressive bouts of irritation. This is one way to say that he had a lot of angry rants at people. He drank too much, all while being a founding elder at John Calvin Hungarian Reformed Church in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. And I don't know this next part for certain, but I had the sense from stories that have been told that my dad in his younger days was a little bit wild, not atypical for a youngest child, but that behavior drew some judgment from his mom, my grandmother. And she favored one of his older brothers who went into the ministry. He was a good boy. My dad was maybe not so much the good boy, and it resulted in some uneven treatment. My dad had a high school job, and he would sock his money away by giving it to the bank of grandma. Grandma kept all the money, but when my dad went back to get the money to buy something for himself, she said, "Oh, I gave that money to your brother so he could buy a car." Hardly even Stevens. My dad was intensely private. He was fearful of the world. He was also given to angry rants. He was expressive that way. My dad also loved baseball, loved that he passed on to all three of his kids. And most of the time, Dad was sort of the quiet authority in the room, respected but avoided, if you could. And I'll admit, sometimes I was afraid of him. As I've grown older, I see my dad differently. As my experiences have changed, I see him not so much as an angry and fearful man, but a sensitive soul who took on a pretty fierce exterior because he was so afraid of what the world might do to him and to the people that he loved, his family. And I wish I could have known him as a man, me being older, and known him as a man, known him as a whole person and not just through the lens of being his teenaged middle son, because that's predominantly how I experienced him. And because a lot of that time as a teenager, I was angry with him. I was so angry with him at times. Always silently, though, because to challenge him in front of other people or just outwardly was to invite an angry tirade. And those were very unpleasant. I had no interest in inviting those. He challenged the decisions I made, whether it was high school sports, the friends that I hung out with. He disapproved of my decision to go to art school, though he did pay my tuition. He was upset with me when I broke up with my long-term college girlfriend. When I wanted to pursue college ministry after graduation, he tried to convince me that it was a foolish decision and that I should really go into church ministry and not the one that I had chosen. All my life, I felt distant from my dad and wondering whether he really ever understood me or if he was proud of who I was. I mean, he certainly was proud of the things that I did and my accomplishments, but was he proud of me? I feel it in many ways to this day. And on that day, 30 years ago, the day he died, it was over. There was no chance to say the things that were left unsaid. There was no opportunity to ask questions that I wasn't brave enough to ask, or maybe too angry to care about what the answers might be. It was over. It was done. And for those of you who have recently experienced the death of a parent, I really want to be able to say, hey, my experience is that over time it gets better. But for me, I don't know that it has. I've grown accustomed to the reality. But 30 years on, man, it still sucks. But as I think about these wounds not really inflicted by my dad, but life itself, my mind goes to a verse that was read at my dad's funeral by my maternal uncle, who was and is in the ministry. And it's a really obscure verse. I'd be surprised if you read it, let alone remember it from somewhere. It's 3 John, verse 4. 3 John's only got one chapter. John writes this: I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. My father, as broken as he was, and I have no room to talk, as broken as he was, he trusted in Christ, and he wanted his children, he wanted me to know rest from my own fears by resting in Christ. And I know this is true because one of the very last conversations I had with him, he asked me to talk with my sister about Christ and make certain of her faith. She, at that time, was going through a wild phase, probably in no small part to the trauma of her father dying of cancer. But it raised questions in his mind, and he wanted me to go talk to her so that he could be certain about where she was in her faith. He wanted his children safe. And it took my dad's brother-in-law saying it to me at my dad's funeral for me to realize that my father did have great joy in me and that I was walking in the truth. This is a frightening time for so many reasons. We have the pandemic. We have the economy really in shambles. We have people who are afraid to go outside for a jog because of the color of their skin. And I don't want to diminish any of those concerns, invalidate any of those fears. Those are very real. But I also want to say this, that God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that the world might not know judgment, but might be saved from judgment that we all deserve because of our choices and selfishness. And in Christ, we're safe. No matter what happens in this life, we're safe. That's what my father wanted me to know, and it is such a comfort to me to know that he had great joy in that. I want to exhort you all. Look to Christ, and you'll be safe. No matter what happens in this life, you'll be safe. Bless you all. Be strong. Keep safe.